I'm hoping that my notes are big enough that I don't need my glasses. Right. Okay. We're in the home stretch, guys. Post-capitalism, post-consumerism, and I'm going to talk at the end about post-planning. Anything with just post as a prefix. Right. Who's actually read Paul Mason's book? You have. Okay. I could literally say anything. Okay. The reason I put this up is because I have read some of it, and I've also seen him speak on it, and I've seen debates where other people challenge him on it, which is great. But essentially, he's talking about kind of the collapse of price and the collapse of power. Well, that's my outtake from his argument. And he seems to be basing most of his argument, a lot of it is real economics that I don't understand, but he seems to be basing it on an economy, a culture, and a technology change, and the changes that have happened and are going to happen in the future, as he calls it. It's about the future, his book. Now, the first one, the economic argument, he seems to be making the argument that we're in a zero margin economy, or we're about to enter one, i.e. There's a corrosion in the price system. Lots of things, falling prices, lots of things even are available for free. He talks about, I think it's Fern or Kirsty said about information technology. And he kind of ends up almost like he's not promoting, but suggesting a kind of rentier economy where money makes money. Money isn't made from things anymore, which I'm not sure is quite right, and I'll talk about that later. The second point he makes is about culture. He talks a lot about the devolution and the decentralisation. We've heard a bit about it already tonight. The dismantling of hierarchies, the falling of the old power structures. And actually, he uses Stuart Brand's idea about the networked economy, where power, or certainly information, is more equally distributed to people. And then thirdly, which is probably what I'm going to spend a bit more time on, he talks about technology. And he seems to suggest that technology is the driving force behind what he's calling post-capitalism. And in fact, he goes so far as to say, as we're in Google, I'll tell you, he goes so far as to say that he thinks the likes of Google and maybe Facebook, he says, are the big innovators. They've brought massive innovation at scale. Other innovators like Airbnb that we heard about earlier, he doesn't see that as innovative because he thinks they haven't got any distinguishable IP. Now that might be true, but he does spin this kind of argument that big innovation is over, and in fact he says that this is nowhere near as important as the Industrial Revolution. Information technology is not as big and can't be scaled like the Industrial Revolution. I think that's wrong, and we'll talk about that as well. So, in summary, his argument is that we have moved, or we are moving, from a centrally organised, mass-marketed world, which is kind of a broadcast-out world, to a networked, globalised, horizontally organised, individually centred, I heard a bit about that as well, individually centred world. And the argument from Mason and others that we've now gone beyond capitalism because we've moved to this kind of world, and this kind of world has new values, and we need to have a system that echoes those new values. Now, think about technology and the economy and how they go hand in hand. And like all good futurists know, the first rule of thumb for futuring is that you have to go into the past. And Paul Sappho will say that you have to go at least twice as far back as you want to go forward. But we're going to go quite a long way back, because what I want to just spend a little bit of time on is thinking about the paradigms of the past and what we can learn. Because there's always patterns in them, right? We're never at kind of ground zero. And I wanted to just call out the 5 distinct technological and therefore economic revolutions that we have gone through. You will know them well, I'm sure. We started with the Industrial Revolution. Let's say we go back to Arkwright's mill in 1771. Of course, that was the birth of the machine age, and lots of jobs were taken away by automated machines. Sound familiar? No. And it gave rise to what's that?
The Olympics, the opening ceremony.
Yeah, exactly. The opening ceremony, 1771. And that gave birth to the Industrial Revolution. And then, of course, we had the steam revolution. So Stephenson rocket tested from Manchester to Liverpool. I think that was 1829. So about 50, 60 years later. Then that gave way to the steel revolution and actually electricity. So this is the first time that we see the US take the leadership in innovation because they have a massive market then in steel, and steel overtakes iron. And so we move to sort of a new economy, a new technological paradigm. And then, as you all know, the Model T Ford is born around 1908. And through the 20s and the 30s, we have the automobile technological paradigm, the revolution. And, say, 1971, we get the launch of the Intel microprocessor. And that starts the information technology paradigm, which we are in at the moment, although we'll argue that we're coming to the end of it. So all the way back through these 200 years or more, we have seen these 50, 60-year paradigms where the economy and technology revolutionises and brings us another set of values and new models, new ways of working and new ways of thinking about the world. And what I wanted to just call out was that the patterns of the past are always the same. So this is from Carlota Perez's book on technological revolutions, but you may have seen it in other places as well. Basically, the model is that there's an eruption at the beginning, the end of a previous technological revolution and the beginning of a new one. Sort of lenders, bankers, investors, they've got idle capital hanging around and they want to put it to profitable use. Where can they put it? So they seek out technological entrepreneurs. Sound familiar? And you get an eruption, all these radical new technologies people are talking about, and they don't know really where they'll go. Will they ever fit into the world as we know it? And you get a kind of frenzy of spending, a frenzy of investment, and over time, paper wealth and real wealth to do with production kind of become disconnected. And suddenly, 20 to 25 years in, usually, you get some kind of crash or some kind of series of mini crashes, and that is caused by this dislocation. People kind of come to their senses eventually. And then there's a synergy phase where production and wealth, finance come back together again, and real growth starts to happen. And what happens in big organisations and institutions in particular is that they start to bring on the new technologies that they had some qualms about and weren't really sure about, and it becomes institutionalised. And we move into a golden age. We've been through this in the information revolution, or the information technology model. We've seen it. We've seen how businesses have had to digitise. If you're a business that hasn't digitised, you're not going to make it. Every business that will succeed has already digitised, because now we're coming into maturity. And the same for every single paradigm, technological paradigm of the past, coming into maturity, where all of those technologies just become part of the norm. Everybody knows about them, everybody understands them, and they become part of the institutions and part of the organisations. So why do I mention all of this? Well, the reason is because every single time we've gone through this 50 or 60 year pattern, and I don't think there's any other evidence to suggest that this is going to be different, because every single time we've come out of a technological paradigm, 50 or 60 years, we haven't been less capitalist, we've been more capitalist. So what happens when all of this production kind of is supported by new technologies is you come out of this maturity phase with much more profit, much more capitalism, and more of that distributed throughout the world. Do you think that China was more or less capitalist 50 years ago at the beginning of the information technology revolution? It's much more capitalist now. You can't call it a capitalist country, of course, but that's the whole thing. They've got the tension between communism and capitalism. That's part of the problem. No, capitalism, we come out of these technological revolutions with more of it, not less. So not less capitalism, but more capitalism, Paul Mason. What I do think is that we are coming to an era of post-consumerism. That I very much do think, and I'm just going to explain a little bit about what I think, again, has happened in the past here. I think over time we've moved from a supply-led kind of model to a consumer-led model, and we're now at the start of an era which is much more user-led. And each of these modes, each of these eras have very different characteristics. So it's worth just taking ourselves back to how in Britain we moved from a supply to a consumer-led culture or economy. Rationing in Britain finished only 2 years before the launch of ITV, like 1954. It's not that long ago. Retail price maintenance was abolished only in 1964. Before that date, a tin of beans cost the same in every single shop in the land. I mean, can you imagine that now? We just can't imagine that with decades of price promotion, deal advertising, price comparison websites. Imagine an economy and a culture, society where prices are fixed. Well, it used to be like that not long ago. But then choice started to open up, and we managed to offer a consumer-led society, culture, economy. And actually, the advertising industry is a great barometer for this, because it was there in the middle. There was the start of the golden age of planning. As we moved into a consumer-led model, late 60s, throughout the 70s into the 1980s, arguably 1984 was peak planning, I actually think, but we can debate that. Because choice was just endless choice. It became, choice became something where you could signify your lifestyle, signify your status. You really were making a choice, almost about your own identity and the way you wanted to live. But more than that, campaigns, agencies sought to make campaigns that brought the voice of the consumer into advertising. It was the first time this had really happened. Pre-testing advertising, not just quantitatively, but qualitatively, trying to get under people's skins. What made them tick? What made them warm to TV ad X more than TV ad Y? All kinds of consumer insights were used to get closer to the end consumer. But as we've entered the 21st century, nothing gets as close to the consumer as the internet, arguably. Directly connecting consumers to products and services and their searches for the right thing at the right time. Of course, data changes hands, but it's not a financial transaction. People are not locked into a subscription. They're not locked into a consumer relationship. They're just using these services from day to day, moment to moment, minute to minute, and that's why we understand them as users now. They've become users, not consumers. Here's an interesting brand that's just launched today. This is a great example of a user-led economy. So this is a brand called Unmade. And this is, if you like, customized, designed knitwear that's on demand on an e-commerce retail platform. Now, it's really important. People are allowed to customize these products themselves, but they can do it at scale. And notice this. This is the landing page of the website. Drag to move the pattern. You can do this on the website now if you go onto it. You can mess about, you can modify, you can manipulate the pattern. You can basically design your own knitwear. And I think this is really important because being a user of this service means co-creating the product. And the next generation and the generation thereafter aren't going to want manufactured products for consumers, for consumption. They're going to want, rather narcissistically perhaps, co-created products, things that they can inject their personality into that are very possibly unique. For them, luxury is not something that demonstrates wealth and status. It's something that demonstrates their own uniqueness, their experiences, their ideas, their story. And Generation Z, people who are probably between 5 and 20 right now in particular, they're already constructing their own individual identities. Individuality and uniqueness is important to them. They don't really want that much to do with norms and definitions. So what's the cost of a sweater at Unmade? Any guesses? Well, you'll be lucky. £200 and upwards. That is not a zero cost economy. Some things will be scarce, some things will be abundant. But when you can co-create things as a user and taking part in the process yourself, then be willing to pay some more. So I'm going to skip the next bit because we're a bit behind. But what I'm going to say is the best explanation that I heard of this was from Steve Jurvetson, who's a VC out in California. And I saw him speak earlier this year, and he said, look, in the future, everything's going to cost $1. And it's the software that you'll pay for. So again, it's not about a corrosion of price. We're just changing the things that we value, and there will be some things that we're quite happy to pay more for. Things might be very cheap, if not free, but the software behind them could be really quite expensive. And so my last point is, I disagree with Mason that we're at the end of innovation. I don't subscribe to this theory. In fact, I would argue that we're entering a really new, really exciting era of exploration. And I just want to finish on this. A lot of the VCs in California are talking about this new era of combinatorial innovation. It's when technological progress stops being linear, because we're combining and recombining innovative technologies. We're mixing and remixing lots of different human and machine technologies. It's pretty exciting. You've heard of social robots. They're aiding health workers right now in homes and hospitals. That's a combination of logistics and data and networked intelligence. You can combine any of these sorts of things you want to come up with new ideas. Super materials, likely to completely transform consumer electronics. Memristas, for example, allow designers to create devices where there's memory systems that kind of work like your own brain function in the devices. Graphene, super materials that are going to spark a revolution in material science. You can create objects that can seemingly do magical things. It's going to transform sensors, plastics, more effective, long-lasting energy outputs. Think about biology for a minute and the ecologies of microorganisms. Think bugs, not drugs, in the future, because the community of microorganisms in your body are going to be put to work to produce probiotics and fight illnesses. It could go on and on and on. You'll be glad to know I'm not going to. But I do think that the biggest combinatorial opportunity is the fusing of technology with biology. And that will be the next technological revolution, the next paradigm that we haven't got to yet, but that we enter into as we come out of the information technology world. In the Emerging Technology Lab at Samsung, they're already researching ways to allow people to use their thoughts to launch an application on your phone, to select a song from a playlist, to even power up a phone. Machines that can read your desire as you stand in front of an outdoor poster site already exist. At the University of Washington, a pilot study has allowed one person's brain signal to be sent over the internet to work another person's hand. That's already happened. And the opportunities for genetic editing, well, I'm sure you all know about CRISPR, are well documented, and they will lead to massive, incomparable innovation over the next probably 50 to 100 years. But back to today. What does this all mean for planning? Well, whilst I don't believe that we're in a post-capitalist world, I do think that we're in a post-consumer world, or certainly on the brink of it and moving into a user-led world. Of course, planning is a very important concept, and we are the APG planning group. But it is, and I think we should remind ourselves, a term that came out of that era where we were moving from a supply-led culture to a consumer-led culture, the 60s and the 70s. And now we're moving from a consumer-led culture to a user-led culture. So it's really important that part of a user-led culture is in part determined by the user. It's not all in the vendor's control. And I quite like this definition of strategy, not planning, that was given to us by Professor Sir Lawrence Friedman at the APG conference, when he said strategies, yes, Not so much a means of asserting control over situations, but ways of coping with situations in which nobody is in total control. Strategy is a way of moving to the next stage of something, not to a permanent conclusion, not to an end, because it does never end. There are no endings. If you think so, you're deluded to the nature of them. They are all beginnings. We're at the beginning of a new technological paradigm, a new 50, 60-year paradigm. We're at the beginning of a new era of exploration, where technology is combined with biology to do magical things. Lots of ethical dilemmas, of course. We're at the beginning of a user-led culture, where the people who engage with services have quite a heavy hand in their design. And in that vision of the future, I don't think there's going to be less capitalism, do you? I think there's going to be more capitalism. It's not post-capitalism, it's capitalism plus, or perhaps, for this week, we call it plus capitalism. And that's the era that we're about to embark on. Thank you.